You know, it would have been so easy to shoot down. It was pressurized. It could get up to about 45,000 feet. But by 52, 53, the Soviets could get up there too. So it would have been something to see fly, though. I would have loved to see one of those fly. You've seen B-52s have, flying over me 100 feet. That was pretty cool, but that's another story. And here's the thing. It worked. Truman could not say anything. What were the two words? Why? The two words they said they had to keep things secret because of what? National security. So Truman knew that the Republicans were misleading about this, but he couldn't say anything. The other thing is, for the first time in history, television became important. And Eisenhower's campaign, he didn't like it, but Eisenhower. Kid, that kid up. So they went to Rosser Reeves, one of the first really well-known and effective advertising executives for this new media television. And Reeves understood, keep it simple, repeat it over and over again. And that's how you advertise. Oh, and also annoy a little bit. If you annoy the person, they remember it. It just, I hate that, but it's there. It sticks. And so he didn't want to annoy people about Eisenhower, but wanted something that would just stick in their head. And so they came up with this idea of Eisenhower, who really didn't want to do these ads, so just have him give a brief little talk, but have him answering regular people. So literally at Times Square in New York, they just pulled people off, brought them in a studio, and had them read a set question, and I'm looking up. So like they're looking at somebody who's big, an impressive stature. And then they got Eisenhower, a separate room, and all on cue cards, answering the question they just asked. It's all set. And first off, he's looking down like he's looking down at them, like he's above, and then he's reading off a cue card. He was so nearsighted that he couldn't see anything without his glasses. But they said, you can't wear your glasses. You got to look manly. So they had a cue card that was like 15 feet tall with letters this big, so he could read it. You can watch him reading it. He goes, looks down, and then finishes looking at the camera. And they're kind of almost like charming today, but you can see how they worked. It's really effective. But look at the little kids. They're just stunned. Made up. Okay. Yeah, didn't say anything. Big cue card. Okay. What does that even mean? We're gonna sit and watch them. His eyes come off. All right, so that is how it worked. And just the first ones, they were really effective. This and, okay, campaign jingles have been around before and they had campaign songs, but find something that people will remember. So, One more time. All right. Maybe we'll see. We'll see. Well, we're not going to go into the details of the election, but it was a decisive victory for Eisenhower. Stevenson dropped civil rights, and that got some of the Deep South back to the Democrats. But Eisenhower's popularity got him in a couple states that really there were no Republican Party. Yet Eisenhower got those states and swept the rest of the country. He was popular, he was a war hero, but didn't seem threatening. He had this ability to seem kind of charming and affable. That really non-threatening part is interesting. He would use that skill quite effectively as commander of all Allied forces. Add one more thing. 1956, it was a repeat. The same exact thing. Ike Stevenson, Ike won again. Almost exactly the same total still. Now, I should add, the Republicans did take control of the Senate for 2 years. But the Democrats controlled the House, and the Democrats would be swept into massive majorities for the rest of the 50s. But don't forget, the Democratic Party's all over the place. We've got Southern Democrats, Northern Democrats. Okay, well, he went to Korea. They still months, they couldn't come up with an armistice, and finally, October 1953. Never got that. October 1953, finally there'd be a ceasefire, an armistice. The big issue were POWs, etc. About this. Over 1 million South Korean civilians died, and Chinese, it's kind of amazing how many Chinese soldiers, over 600,000 Chinese soldiers. This was a bloodbath of a war. It ended October 1953. On almost the exact same line that the trenches were on. Did they ever come up with a peace treaty? No. To this day, technically, they're still at war. To this day. There are still 28,000 American soldiers in South Korea and a tactical air wing in Korea to this day. Now, South Korea has a massive army, and it's a very rich country. Then it wasn't that rich and a dictatorship, but technically we're still at war. Yeah. October 53. Yeah, that's all you. Yeah, just now. One thing Eisenhower did. There was a whole issue about Chinese prisoners of war, and they couldn't come up with an agreement. And Eisenhower threatened nuclear war if they didn't sign a peace agreement. He threatened nuclear war. He sent heavy bombers to Okinawa, which was now a big base, and threatened war. Now, did he really mean it? No one thought so. But we'll come back to that idea about threatening war. That was a wounded American soldier right after a battle on Fort Chop Ridge. I got a whole series of pictures. We're jumping right to here. Eisenhower called his program. Now you need a name for your program, right? We had New Deal, Fair Deal, and now Dynamic Conservatism. Once again, it doesn't mean anything. But he was basically to preserve the New Deal. And he really angered conservative Republicans. He will be called a communist. Eisenhower will, by members of the Republican Party by the end of the decade. And he did massive public works programs. The most famous, the Federal Aid Highway Act, sometimes you see it called the National Defense Highway Act, building the interstate highway system. We just called it the Dwight Eisenhower Highway System. And it would take, the main parts of the highway would take about, from about 54 till, it would be about 89 when they finished the main elements of it. It was, so when I was a kid growing up, it was only about half done in Montana, the interstate highway system. And I can still remember when they finished like the full interstate where you go to Billings, Miles City to Billings on the interstate. It's pretty wild. And they copied the Autobahn, and you probably notice every summer they're redoing parts of the interstate. That's a constant construction. That's on purpose. That is on purpose. They built it in such a way that it would need constant repair. So they're constantly hiring more workers and pumping money into local economies. that is done on purpose. And so if you complain about that, you have every right to complain. They could have made it longer lasting, but the idea is to pump money in the economy. He also expanded Social Security, which infuriated conservative Republicans, expanded it for things like household health and farm laborers. Also, health insurance. They made health insurance deductible for businesses to allow for the system we have today because we didn't have national health care insurance. Oh, that's that's in Montana. I got this out of whack somehow, but that's, it says the Gallatin History Museum, so I only fish I could find, but they're starting to make that turn before they go up Bozeman Pass on the interstate. I just thought that was pretty interesting, and I love sitting there doing that highway there. I remember the highway, the interstates pretty well. But the thing about the 1950s is that was really the expansion and total takeover of the consumer economies that started in the 1920s. We talked about this before. And the big thing was that companies were producing significantly more by the middle of the 1950s what people could buy. What is it called where you get so efficient, the bigger you are, you become more efficient, produce at a lower cost. What is that called again? Do you remember? Remember economies of scale? Well, factories got so efficient by the mid-1950s that they're producing more than what people could buy. How do you get demand up? How do you get people to buy stuff they don't necessarily need? Say it again. Well, partially, but what do I get? Even but the wages with extra money, how do you get people to buy stuff they don't need? That's advertising. Yep, advertising, the fine art, and then you're right about wages too, getting people jobs. You're exactly right about that with higher wages, and then advertising to convince people they are going to buy stuff they don't need. The best example from that era, which would be a big deal till probably turn of the century, would be the new model year for cars. So here's the brand new Chrysler 56. And with cosmetic changes, the idea being that your old car is old and you look like a loser if you have this car. You need the new Chrysler. I should have these with the Sabre. That's an F-86 with a Sabre fighter plane. So they try to make cars look like fighter planes. You ever see the big tail fins? They would get bigger and bigger on the car so it looked like the tail fin for a jet. That's what they try to do. But to convince people that you need that new model. A really good example of what they do with, like, I'll just give you a brand name, like iPhones. They come up with a new model, even though recently the models have had basically no changes at all, except for minor cosmetic changes. But what do? They get people to buy the new ones because they got to get the new one, right? Advertising, the first golden age of advertising would be right after World War I. The second golden age would be right after World War II. So they go from selling the war and hating the Germans to selling toothpaste. The same exact tools. What's the other way? If you produce more than what people buy, you have to produce products that break or are already too old. It's called planned obsolescence. You produce products with the idea that they're got to get a new one. You got to replace it. It costs too much to repair it. Or it's a disposable thing. I mean, think about how many disposable things we have in our society now, how incredibly wasteful it is, but we just accept it. I was looking for something in my drawers, and I have plastic silverware, just in case. Can you think of anything more wasteful than plastic silverware? Yeah, absolutely can. Like all the plastic bottles for water. Yeah, like those.
This is an important part of the economy.
But it is, because you got to buy new ones, and all that thing is disposable. Buy new one, throw it away, buy a new one. It was an important small business, with TV repair. I can't even imagine TV repair now, because they're all televisions are designed now specifically to throw away. They don't work, you toss it, buy a new one. It's designed to break. They're designed shoddy. So are computers. So are iPhones. So are all of them. They're designed to break and throw it away, buy a new one. And that's going to cause some issues, obviously, down the road, but the idea is constantly need demand. And so planned obsolescence. Phone, computers, though, the best example. I mean, phones are specifically designed, they're already obsolete when you buy them. And they know people will spend money. And so there's a great one, that television's being thrown away. They had these, they're not flat screen. How do they call these? There's a few of these in the room, but these kind of TVs with a big, thick, flat front for these TVs, and there's still a few in the room. Every classroom got one of these, like in 2004, and then they threw them all away by 2006. They're already obsolete. It's just kind of amazing how that happens. It's planned, it's designed. And what we have is definitely a growing concept of a middle class America. And remember the Great Depression, the gap between the rich and the poor shrank from the late 30s all the way to the 1980s. And an important element of this is, if we're going to have demand, you constantly need new jobs. And so these are the annual change in employment, average annual change of employment for president. And so you can see Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, a little bit of a doldrums, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton. You notice job creation kind of begin to slide a little bit. Obama, Trump, Biden. That's the annual percentage job growth. Well, the Trump years were mediocre, average job growth, but then COVID hit. And so it would have been about here. But then because of COVID, it's here. Just like Obama would be significantly higher, but he came in office during the worst economic downturn in American history. So his is lower than what it should. Same thing, George W. Bush, there were two recessions. One was the worst recession since the Great Depression, and that's why his is so low. Boom years, Carter's years are weird. Boom years. Biden's a little bit, same deal. Because of COVID, there was that big job growth the year after COVID. And then the last 2 years have been really high job growth for in the Biden years. But more people, jobs, you got to spend money. Got to spend money. And they go by party there. And a new American dream is going to be developed. Remember that Jeffersonian dream that people still wanted? And why people came to America, get that little farm, be an independent yeoman. Now you have the opportunity in the 1950s to enjoy lard and all the lard you can eat. They're happy because of lard. That's a real ad. I didn't know where else to put it, but I desperately wanted to show you lard. So the new American dream is going to be different. It's going to be now a much more, Alan, very good. A much more of this modern society is no longer agricultural to buy and own your own home, which is going to be obviously very hard to do, and it's going to be very hard to do now. I need a stapler now, there's paper left. A car, obviously, and then consumer, all these new gizmos, these wonder inventions of the 50s and 60s, personified by the television, personified by the TV. But another big one would be a refrigerator with a freezer. Wow. But things that you did not need all of a sudden became necessities, partially because of the changing society, but partially because of advertising. And that's the new American dream. And the problem was there's no homes, there's families growing incredibly fast because we have the baby boom. So this is the first time I start talking about generations. And you'll see the area in red is considered the baby boom and all the silliness about generations. I mean, it is really pretty silly. They decide they'll end the baby boom in 1965. What the heck is the difference between someone born in 64 and someone born in 67? Valid point. And so I don't read too much into generation stuff, and nobody really should, except for the fact you can see an increase. But you'll notice there was an increase during the war too. One of the reasons in wartime is insecurities about the future. People started getting married really young and having families right away. In fact, getting married like just meet married during the war. You might be gone. So it's almost like a desperation to have a family or do these things before you're going to be separate. That happens in every war. And then after the war, with the increased affluence, more people had families. You'll notice when the baby boom generation began to be old enough to have children, they didn't have as many kids. For lots of reasons. But, one more thing about that. It was considered, we had to keep babies as sanitary as possible. Now they're starting to understand about germ transmission, and especially with the wartime conditions about infections. And so as soon as a baby was born, the idea was you got to get them away from the mother as quickly as possible and put them in isolation. And so you would go, literally, especially in big hospitals, you would have these massive rooms filled with babies, and they'd be cared for by nurses. And you would go look at your kid through a window. And it's like, I think my kid's that one. It's the baby room. And that just cracks me up. If you know anything about it today, I mean, like literally, as soon as the child's born, they want it with the mother and like right away. But that just cracks me up. And they'd be like that for about 4 years. Okay, I made that part up. About a week, though, they want to keep them in isolation. That's pretty funny. So there's a real shortage of homes. You have new families, and there's no homes being built from World War II or from Great Depression and World War II. And it's no coincidence that you have the beginnings of suburbia, where you can take relatively cheap farmland or grazing land outside of towns, and boom, you have cheap, low-cost homes. We see around Helena, the homes that have developed out here in the North Valley, but especially to the east. Part of the reason people have moved in there because the real estate is cheaper, and therefore the homes are cheaper than in town. And it's just pure cost. And so this huge housing shortage will be met outside of cities, which is going to have huge effects in the cities. Bill Levitt would make one of the first prototypical suburbs. Now, they were going on before, but Levitt would revolutionize this. Levitt was a combat engineer called a CB for the Navy Construction Battalion, CB, in World War II, and talked to the guys he was in the service with and asked, what do you guys want after the war? And they all said a home. And he got, home. If I could buy cheap land and then take the manufacturing techniques of the assembly line and take it to home building, this will revolutionize home building. And so they would go here and have these massive crews that would go through and clear, they would dig, and you'd have crews of like laying the foundation. Go boom, 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 and just lay foundations as fast as possible. As soon as the cement dries, they're framing the house. They're putting in the inside. Yeah, 20 guys would run into a home and do the rugs while they're doing the roof on top and go house to house like an assembly line. Or they could build 2 or 3 homes a day, all with prefab sides and just go. Now they're smaller homes, but build them fast. And you also notice something else. Look at the blocks of Levittown. They're not blocks anymore. They're not that nice grid pattern. And it shows they're kind of windy, like the Sunhaven. And other housing developments are like this around Helena. Why? Suburbs would not have worked, especially considering the way the United States was without automobiles. Blocks like this were for cars. No one's walking, they're all going to drive. And so you don't need small blocks where you're walking and have to go from corner to corner. You're driving. So who cares how big the blocks are? I mean, like Sunhaven right here, it's not for walking. It's a pain to walk in. And if you go to places like east of the Capitol that were built in the 70s, that were 70s and 80s, the blocks are really long and there's no sidewalks because everything's going to be by car. All by car. We can drive everywhere you want to go on these new interstate highways in your beautiful Chevy station wagon. That'd be pretty cool to have. And here you have nice farmland. That's the same farmland outside of Pennsylvania for the suburbs. Cheaper homes, and now people from the cities or young married couples are going to leave the city and go to the suburbs. And it will radically change cities. How did people afford those? Remember the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, and the VA. The VA is, you know what the VA stands for? Administration, of course. Veterans Administration. What was the bill that set up college and home loans for veterans? Yeah, that's the GI Bill. So this provided mortgage insurance and allowed for people to afford homes they never could afford before. Before, homes you had to put significantly more of a down payment, and you might get at most a 10-year mortgage. The FHA, because you had mortgage insurance, you could get a 30-year mortgage and therefore have longer to pay off your home. Okay, you can pay a lot of interest, but you can pay off your home. Yeah, look at the cost of this. Okay, there's been a lot of inflation, but still, home costs are just shocking today because we have a massive home shortage in the United States now. And one more thing, these were white only. And we're not talking Jim Crow laws. We mean outside of the South. The covenants that these housing developments would do as the legal rules that everybody would sign to buy these homes would have things like this one. This is one for one in New York. And it was uncommon not to have something that would say, no person other than one of the white or Caucasian race shall be permitted to occupy any property. And that was the norm. And it was not illegal until 1968. To the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Yeah.
So is that the same as redlining, or is this different?
It's very similar to redlining. Now, redlining was actually being done inside of town, inside of cities. And that was done by the FHA. This is done by the people building the housing developments. And part of the justification, they would say, well, we can't allow people who are not Caucasians because housing values will drop. And this from the Saturday Evening Post, they had a whole article about that from 1970. And so people are leaving, they're white. And what's happening in the cities? And they're going to come up with a name with this. The cities are going to be crushed. So first off, we have a massive population change. You'll notice from over 30 million farmers in 1940 to less than 3.8 million. And look at the population growth in the cities. So here's before World War II. City, suburbs. Okay. Warriors in Great Depression, not a lot of shifting. Look at the growth of the suburbs in the 70s. It's a radically different country. And many started moving to the south, the Sun Belt. Can't understate the value of air conditioning. Air conditioning would allow for more people to work, to allow for people to live there, to allow them to have jobs in during the daytime where it might be too hot to work in places like Arizona. Oh, we can have air conditioning. Air conditioning really began to take off in the 1950s, but you see a big development in the 1970s. No coincidence, Arizona would just explode in population. Also, companies began to move down there because the South was significantly more anti-union. And the big reason they're anti-union is because unions were integrated. So they could be anti-union and therefore keep wages low. Also, water. There's going to be a massive issue of water here. So, for example, Nevada and Arizona, where do they get most of their water from? Where? The Colorado River. And the Colorado River doesn't even run to the sea. It's drained dry. Now, it's mostly agriculture, but still, we got to have cows. So, in the cities, by the late 60s, early 70s, they started calling it urban blight. But you even saw elements of it in Montana. Downtowns just begin to crumble. Why do you think there's a walking mall? All these businesses were leaving. They tried to put a walking mall to try to get businesses to stay. Didn't really work, kind of today. But anyways, back to this. They called it white flight. All these people went to suburbia. And the taxes, who's going to pay the taxes to do things like basic city services like garbage collection, police, schools, if everyone left? And they'll soon give it a name, and this goes back to medieval Europe. They'll start calling some of these areas the ghetto. That, I'm glad that term has gone away, but you will see this in the 60s and 70s in terms written about the poor areas, especially that is the Bronx of New York City. New York City is going to go bankrupt twice because so many people left and the tax base crushed. They couldn't clean up the garbage. And what's going to happen is, if these neighborhoods just turn into ruin, more people will leave, meaning more ruin, which means more people want to leave. And what's going to happen to crime? Crime will begin to skyrocket for lots of reasons, but that was one of the reasons. In New York City's crime rate now is really low, but that reputation of having such high crime in the 60s, 70s, and 80s exists to this day. Next, what about families? The cult of domesticity made probably its biggest return since the beginning of it. It kind of went away during the Depression and the war, but now people were desperate for normalcy and to go back to the way it was after World War II and the Depression. So my grandma, who I told you won World War II, by building B-24s and B-29s, the day after VJ Day, she got her pink slip. And she was a supervisor and an inspector. And men who had jobs who were below her, they kept their jobs. And she got them. And that's what it was for every woman who worked there. In fact, she still vividly remembers that because they stayed all night celebrating the end of the war and went to work and got her pink slip. And she was angry, but at the same time happy. Because the thought was, I'll go back to normal. A normal life. And therefore, she could go back to being what the role is in the cult of domesticity. Remember, that was created during the Industrial Revolution. What is the only role for women? Yeah, married homemaker. And if a woman was not married and was not a homemaker, there was something wrong with her. Something wrong. Something different. And something else happened too because of the cult of domesticity. It changed the way the cult of domesticity started taking place in the 50s. Couples started getting married really young. You start seeing women getting married not uncommonly at 16 or 17 years old. And it was very normal to get married as a teenager. So 18, 19, that was normal. 16, 17 was not weird. Which today, that is unusual. Back then, it was like normal. And men a little bit older, but not much older. People think about people getting married young, they say, oh, that was like the way they used to do it back in the 19th century. No, they got married a lot older. You had to be kind of established to get married. Back then, people started getting married really young with the expectation is this lifestyle is going to continue. And so you're going to see then that really this establish this. Women stay at home while their husband goes off to work, and she is the helpmate to the husband, or like the first mate. You see that in some of the magazines. And I like this one from right after World War II, The American Woman. But this is really starting to push that, to get back home. And so, this idea of women being this narrow role, and that's all they're capable would be used in advertising. These are advertisements from the 50s and 60s. And they're kind of mind-boggling. You mean a woman can open it? This one, I can't even wrap my mind around. So, if your husband ever finds out you're not store testing for fresher coffee, meaning going through different brands of coffee to find the best for him, he's beating her. Now, I want you to contemplate this. By the way, this is supposed to be funny. See, you're supposed to be laughing. So, this is the kind of casual sexism existing with the casual racism happen all the time. Sooner or later, your wife will drive home. See? Kind of shocking. And Obviously not true, but didn't matter. But ironically, just like the first women's rights movement came out with the development of cult of domesticity. By the way, I do like that and see some guys like, yeah, women drivers, ha ha ha, which makes me laugh heartily. Men are much more dangerous drivers. If you don't believe me,
Montana has prevent them from hurting you guys more. More accidents.
not me.
No, just in general male.
All right, so this would trigger feminism in the late 1960s out of the same development of the cult of domesticity. And one of the big triggers was Betty Friedan's book, which is a fantastic book by the name of The Feminine Mystique. And basically what she says from her own personal experience, she was brilliant, got a full ride to Vassar, got a degree in journalism, but what did she do? She got married and had children, and very happily married, loved her kids, but always felt like she wanted the same opportunities that men have. And she actually started doing a reporting and talking to other women, other college graduates like her who were now homemakers, and they said, we feel like we have been left out, that we can't be happy in just a fully domestic role. So women need more avenues for success, just like men do. And let me add one more thing. That's the mystique. The mystique is the cult of domesticity said women were like on this special plane, and there's a mystique about them, and all they need to do is be married, and they'll be perfectly happy. And no, women, just like men, let me rephrase that. Everybody needs different opportunities for success, whether it could be business, career, at home, they need different opportunities. It's a really good book. I highly recommend Feminine Mystique. And so, another very separate teen culture would develop. There's always been a generation gap. Always. Because in my day, we had it a lot harder when I was your age. See, I'm already getting ready for that. And heck, I'm like 2 generations or 3 generations older than you. Those of us who were born in the previous, 2 centuries ago. But this was different because there are more affluent teens in the 1950s than ever before. There are more affluent teens. They have more money than ever before. And not a lot, but something about your age. You spend money. Now, so do adults, don't get me wrong, we all know that. But you spend money, and that's when businesses start to market products specifically for teens, for children and teens, because they know you'll spend money. But here's what do they sell it on? It's things that your parents don't have. And so media would exacerbate that generation gap. And does that still happen today? Of course it does. It still happens all the time. Things are marketed to you on things I have no idea about, on like the TikTok or something. I don't even know what that is. I'm old. I don't even know what a phone is. But actually, I've never even looked at the TikTok. Now we got. See, I'm an old person. All the old people I know are on Facebook. I'm not on the Facebook either. So.
Don't steal your shadow.
And so, drive-in movies, hula hoops, Brill cream, a little dab will do ya to grease up your hair. Everyone, no, you showered at night. Nobody showered in the morning. So you needed something to hold your hair down. Women did too. Women would style their hair. And this would be done, advertised on TV. Started being television shows. Oh, Davy Crockett. Whew, that was something. And so, drive-ins for the urchins, for teenagers. Movies. Hey, look at that crazy 3D. But the big one was music. Rock and roll music had its start in the 1950s. Just a second. So, Alan Freed was a DJ in Cleveland. He's the first one to popularize that term, didn't invent it, for a new style of music that combined jazz, big band, blues, but most importantly, rhythm and blues are what they called then, literally they called it race music and hillbilly music, which in 1955 they would change to what kind of music? Country. And this combination, a truly American art form, which still defines music to this day, even though in the beginning of the 70s and 80s, they started putting genres on everything. But rock and roll was much more broad back then. And this was marketed to kids. Not only that, you could buy your own. You could get a 45, a single with 2 songs on it, your own little record player. I mean, can you even imagine that today, listening to the music you want to? No way. So you didn't have to listen to what your parents wanted. And you could listen on your own. And they could market to you as a dangerous, crazy, radical music. And that right there is the man, I would argue, invented music. Okay, now you know the type of music I like. Chuck Berry. Want to hear one Chuck Berry song? We started it. He invented. I think by the way, music, especially in such a racialized culture. Even though it was, yeah, if you don't like Chuck Berry, you don't like music. Goodbye, everybody. Huh?
My brother had an escape from that song.
Cool. Goodbye. We'll see ya. Have a good day, everybody. See you tomorrow. Goodbye. Bye.
No, I was really, no, I was just like, I'm 6.
Deep down in Louisiana.
That was my water.
That would be the worst part of my day.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Miss.
Have a good Tuesday.
What if it's just gone?